My name is Paul Woolever. I'm the owner of Pinellas Power Products. And this is the installation instruction video for Predator's new 5,000 watt inverter generator. This generator uses the Ducar 224cc engine, which is the same engine that Westinghouse and Onan use in their 4,500 watt generators, which are essentially the same. The significance about this generator is it is dual fuel, and I will point out the differences as I go as to what would be different from a dual fuel generator to a gasoline only generator. This generator is now available with two different versions of engine. The original version had a Ducar 224cc engine. The new version has a Ratto 224cc engine. The generators are essentially the same. The quickest way to tell which engine you have is the Ducar 224cc engine does not have a flange around the valve cover. If you have the new version, it has a Ratto 224cc engine, and the valve cover has a large flange around it. They're both held on with floor bolts, so it's not a big deal, but that's the quickest way to tell which engine you have. This video has been updated so it will cover both installation versions. So let's get started. Okay, start off with, my kit comes with everything you're going to need except for the fuel tank itself. Reason number one for not including the fuel tank is it seems that very few people want the exact same size tank. So whether you want anywhere from a 3-gallon to a 109-gallon tank, you can purchase the tanks locally. The other reason is that if you were to purchase the tank from me, then you'd be paying to ship a large box of air across the country. So I include everything that you're going to need except the tank itself. The first thing to notice in the kit is this flash drive / bottle opener that contains a higher resolution of the video that you're watching right now. So the first step in doing the install is going to be to remove the two side covers. And these side covers come off very simply with these wing type fasteners that you don't need a wrench for. On the bottom of the carburetor, you'll notice that there is an addition on this generator, and that's because of the fact that it is a dual fuel or propane and gasoline generator. The purpose of this is that when you've got the generator in the propane position, it closes this valve in the bottom of the float bowl so that it does not draw gasoline out of the float bowl up into the emulsifier tube and run on gasoline and propane at the same time, which would make it a little bit rich, or a lot rich. And here's how that works. The fuel selector valve on the front of the generator has three positions. It's got a propane position, an off/storage position, and a gasoline position. And that's pretty self-explanatory. If you're running it on gasoline from the stock tank, you would put it in the gasoline position and follow the instructions in the owner's manual. If you were to run it off of propane, you would put it in the propane position and follow the instructions in the owner's manual. Now let me go ahead and show you what happens when you switch it to the propane position. This little valve down here has dropped down, and I will slowly move it to the off/storage position while you're watching so that you can see what it does. You notice this little arm pulled up, which closes this valve. If you were then to continue to move the knob to the fuel position, it compresses this spring. So if you're running it in the gasoline position and then you get ready to put it away, you'd move it to the off/storage position. And what that does is it shuts off the fuel flow from the stock fuel tank, but it leaves this in the open position so that it will use up all the fuel that's in the hose going from the fuel selector valve to the carburetor, and it'll use up most of the fuel that's in the float bowl. And what that does is when you're storing the generator, that fuel will not oxidize as quickly, hence the name off/storage position. I only have one concern about this, and I'll show you right now, is if you've got it in the propane position, and that's down, and what this does is it closes off this valve so that the carburetor cannot pull fuel out of the float bowl. If this bracket were to bend down, and you'll see that this bracket is very thin right here, and at this end, all it is just hooked over the top of the carburetor, so this could bow out very quickly, and there's no bolts on this side. So this one here is the only bolt, and this little tab is all that's got to bend. So if this were to bend down, even when it pulls on this cable, it can flex this bracket down, and if you see this, yeah, it actually flexes up a little bit. So fortunately, this is very easy to troubleshoot. If you're running this generator on my fuel kit or the stock tank, the stock gasoline tank that is, and the generator just will not run, come over here and just push up on this and see if it moves at all. Right now it doesn't move because everything's correct. And let me show you what I mean. This is the propane position. So the propane position, this valve is closed, and you can see that it moves a little bit. But when you put it in the gasoline/storage position, get it right there is a storage position, this will not move this arm. I'm a little bit concerned about, I'm a lot concerned about this bracket bending. So what I'm going to do is, before we do anything as far as my kit is concerned, is I'm going to go ahead and put 2 zip ties to help hold this. And they're going to go around this mounting bolt. And I'm going to be the first one to admit that this looks a little hokey. However, I once heard that if something is stupid and it works, then it's not stupid. And we'll go ahead and apply that here. It looks a little stupid, but if it works, it's not stupid. So these zip ties are rated at 20 pounds a piece. So if we put 2 of these zip ties around this to help support this bracket, then in theory, that should be capable of an extra 40 pounds of load. And I don't believe that it would ever bend then. And once again, I would recommend doing this, whether you're purchasing my kit or not. I think it's just something that's going to make your life easier down the road. But as I said, fortunately, it's so easy to troubleshoot. If you go to lift up on this and it doesn't go up because it's already up, then that's not the problem. But if you go to lift up on this when it's in the storage position or the gasoline position, if you go to lift up on it just a little bit and it moves just a little bit, my suspicion is that this bracket bent down, because I can see that happening easily. Okay, now we will get started on the installation of my kit proper. Okay, in this step we're going to remove the valve cover, Doesn't matter which version of the engine you have, they're both held on with 4 bolts. It's pretty simple. Okay, the first step is going to be to remove the valve cover, and that's this cover right here. So, in order to remove the valve cover, we're going to pull the spark plug cap off, and we're just going to let it hang right down here because it's out of the way. The next step is going to be to remove the breather hose. And the breather hose on the valve cover is held in place by a Corbin clamp. And let me spend just a little bit of time explaining Corbin clamps, because there are going to be some hidden that we can't explain very well. So we might as well explain them in advance. Okay, to undo a Corbin clamp, you squeeze the 2 tabs and the clamp opens up. If you look at the clamp with the tabs squeezed, it's open, and if you release the 2 tabs, the clamp closes down. So, like that, the clamp is open, and like that, the clamp is closed. Okay. We will be reusing this hose later on. The valve cover is held on with 4 bolts with 8mm heads on them. So we'll go ahead and remove the 4 bolts and remove the valve cover. Okay, now that we have the valve cover off, I'm going to show you how to disable the stock PCV valve. In the first section, I will show you how to disable the stock PCV valve in the Ducar 224cc engine, and then I will go and show you how to disable the PCV valve in the Rado 224cc engine. The purpose for removing the valve cover is to disable the PCV valve. And the PCV valve is simply a one-way valve. And you'll notice this rubber gasket right up here in the corner. There is a thin sheet of metal that seats against this rubber from the back side. And if we push on it just a little bit, you can see that sheet of metal moving. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this rubber pop this out, like so, and then we're going to buckle this thin metal reed. The easiest way to do that is to take a fine pick, and you can see that there are 4 indented places. Go to the one right at this end and hook around the reed and just buckle that reed, and you'll feel the reed hitting the reed stop. So once you've done it with a small pick tool, now you've got enough room to get a larger screwdriver in there. And now you've opened this up completely to where you can get airflow. If you wanted to, you could take these 2 screws out, pull the breather plate out, and disassemble the reed valve from the back side. I strongly don't recommend doing that because there's a rubber O-ring in here and 3 sponges and so forth that have a tendency to fall out on you. So this disables the stock PCV valve. And my kit comes with a replacement PCV valve that we'll be mounting external to the engine And this way we're going to use this pulse wave to power the fuel pump. This is how you would disable the stock PCV valve if your Predator 5000 has the Rado 224cc engine in it. If you look in the valve cover, you'll see the breather plate, and that's held in place with just one bolt. The breather plate has a PCV valve, which is this thin little wafer of steel. So it'll let air go out, but it'll keep it from coming back in. You'll notice that there's a small oil return hole at the bottom. If you do put gasket sealant on it, when you put it back together, make sure not to plug that hole up. There are two ways to disable the PCV valve. One way would be to take a pair of needle nose pliers and just bend this small wafer of steel. The other way would be to take one of the zip ties that's included in the kit and zip tie that small wafer of steel against the reed stop so that it stays open. So now you see that the wafer is being held open. Can you see that clearly with the camera? Does that make it worse or better?
It's fine.
Okay. So at any rate, your reed is now being held open. So you'll put your gasket back in place in the top of the valve cover, drop the breather plate Incidentally, the gasket goes in like this with the large section in the upper right hand corner as you're looking at it. Drop the breather plate into place and then put the bolt back in it. We will be putting in a new PCV valve down line, but we want to take advantage of the crankcase pressure and vacuum. Now that we've got the stock PCV valve disabled, it's time to reinstall the valve cover. Like I stated earlier, both versions of this generator, the valve cover is held on by 4 bolts. So let's go ahead and do that. You'll notice when we pulled it off that there is a gasket for the valve cover area. And this gasket remained undamaged. But my kit does come with a tube of Permatex RTV black gasket sealant. If you had damaged the gasket during this step, you would use the black RTV silicone gasket sealer to repair it with. So now we're going to go ahead and put the valve cover back on, and installation is exactly the reverse of the removal. I strongly recommend putting all 4 bolts in loosely and then running down and tightening them with a wrench, because if the gasket starts to drop down and so forth, you can see and fix it before tightening it down and damaging the gasket. Okay. So now we'll go ahead and plug the spark plug cap back on. The reason I unplug the spark plug and get it out of the way is this rubber flap right here has a tendency to get in the way of the valve cover gasket whenever you try to put the valve cover back on. So if you just unplug the spark plug cap and drop it out of the way, you don't have that problem. Okay, so we'll save this tube of gasket sealant for a later time. Okay, I was reviewing the video earlier and I misstated the operation of this valve one time. I stated about a half a dozen times correctly, but one time I stated it backward. When this valve or this arm is in the up position, this valve is in the open position for gasoline. When the valve or when the arm is down, it is in the closed position for gasoline, but in the position that it would need to run for in propane. So it would be in the up position like this when the fuel selector valve is in the off/storage position and when it's in the gasoline position. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to remove these portions of the cabinet in order to install the rest of the kit. Truth be known, this side of the cabinet does not have to be removed. It makes it a whole lot easier, and it certainly makes it easier to video it. So for the purpose of this video, I'm really need to take it off. My opinion is it makes it easier to do the install. Of course, you have 2 bolts on the front as well. Two bolts on the rear. And the 7 that are out there on the side cover, for a total of 11 bolts on each side. Of course, this side comes off the same way. Pull out the 2 front bolts, the 2 rear bolts, and of course the 7 on the side. going to take a pair of forceps, and that's because I don't want the recoil start rope to go pulling up right in the middle of me working on this. Now we're going to disconnect the fuel line. Make certain that the fuel selector valve is in the off/storage position. Okay, you'll notice that this is the hose that runs from the fuel tank through the fuel filter and on into the back of the fuel selector valve. Then hidden behind it is another hose, and you can see the Corbin clamp on the other hose right here. I'm going to take the front Corbin clamp and just rotate it out of the way to make life a little bit easier. And now hopefully you can see the rear Corbin clamp more clearly. And I'm going to take a pair of pliers and I'll squeeze that rear Corbin clamp and just slide it back. And I'll do the same thing with the hose. Now we'll go over to this side, come around this side. You notice that this top hose is the propane hose. That's the larger one that goes up and then comes around and goes behind the carburetor. This smaller one under it right here is the one that we just disconnected. So we're going to pull this hose this direction. And then we're going to take and use the retainer that's wrapped around it, which is just a thin steel band with a layer of rubber over it, and just momentarily tuck it down into here. Just making sure it's not getting kinked. Okay, what I'm going to do is take the 1/4 inch to 3/16 adapter from the kit, and I'm going to slide that adapter into the original hose that used to go into the back of the fuel selector valve. And then we're going to take the Corbin clamp and slide it down into place. And then we'll just tuck that hose right back there for now. Then included in the kit is a section of 1/4 inch hose, a rather long section of 1/4 inch hose. And what we're going to do is we're going to cut a 20 1/2 inch section of this hose. I'm going to cut it just a little bit longer. I'm going to cut it almost 21. And what we're going to do with this hose is we're going to feed it right back through. This was the stock hose that we removed from the fuel selector valve, and this is the propane hose. So we're going to feed this between those two and just push it through to the other side. And here it is here. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take the Corbin clamp that was originally on the breather hose that you removed from this position and use this Corbin clamp for this hose. If you wanted to, you can use one of the white clamps that came in my kit. However, the Corbin clamp is much easier to use. And you'll see why if you try to use one of the white ones. And I'm just going to squeeze that down just a little bit to make sure it's nice and snug. because this hose does carry gasoline. So and we'll slide it back about an inch away from the end. And then I'll grab the hose firmly with a pair of pliers and I'll slide it that way, and then I'll pull it back this way onto the hose barb. I don't know if you can see that or not. I believe you can. And it's often easier to stick your finger in there and feel it. And that is all the way up, okay? So now we're going to squeeze the two tabs on the Corbin clamp and slide our Corbin clamp up into place. And then once again, I'm going to stick my finger in there and feel it, make sure it's right. And it is. Okay. Now we're going to take and cut a 13-inch section off from the piece of hose that came in the kit. And again, I'm going to cut it just a little bit longer than 13 inches. And what we're going to do with this is, remember the adapter that we put onto the original hose that used to be on the back of the fuel selector valve. This is going to go onto that adapter. Okay. And then we're going to go ahead and put one of the hose clamps included in the kit on there. Incidentally, if you'd like life to be a little bit easier, you can use oil from the dipstick to put on these hose ends where they slide onto the fittings. And that'll make them slide on a whole lot easier. Now this particular clamp, I'm orienting with the clasp side facing the front of the generator. The Corbin clamp, I'm going to face the clasp toward me, and they just seem to tuck in there nicely that way. So that's the hose running from the carburetor now. It used to, this end of it used to connect to the fuel selector valve, and the other end connects to the carburetor. So we're extending this down. Then this is the hose that now connects to the fuel selector valve. So it's going to be fuel running into the engine. So we're going to take a T-fitting included in the kit, and this time we're going to put just a drop of oil on it to make our lives easier. And I'm going to slide it into the end of this hose. Can you imagine if I hadn't put that drop of oil on it? And I'm orienting the third barb on the T-fitting to face straight up, and you'll see why shortly. Then we're going to take another section of hose, and we're going to cut that exactly 6 inches, or in my case, I'm going to cut it 6 inches and just a little bit longer, just in case I have to trim it. If you cut them just a little bit long, you can always shorten them, but if you cut them too short, you can't lengthen them. Then I'm going to take another section, 9.5 inches long, and of course I will cut that a little bit longer also. We're going to go ahead and cut that about 10. Just a little bit of oil. And that is going to go on to the third barb of this T-fitting. Now these hoses were all cut off of a reel of hose, so each of them has a natural bend. The one that goes straight up, I want it to slightly curve to the left. The one that goes off to the left, I want it to slightly curve under the engine, because that's ultimately where it's going to go. Then, included in the kit is a fully assembled PCV valve, and it is going to set in here just like this. If you have the Ducar version of this generator, if you have the version of this generator that uses the Ducar 224cc engine, you will install the PCV valve exactly the way it comes. If you have the Rado version 224cc engine, you're going to do some additional work. Remember the black breather hose that you removed, and it went from the valve cover to the air box. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to be using a clear hose instead of the black hose that you removed, and that's only so that you can see much more clearly. You're going to take the original black breather hose and you will cut it in half. Included in the kit is going to be an adapter that goes from 3/8 to 1/4 inch. You'll notice that the adapter has a hose barb on the 3/8 inch end, and it also has 2 stops. Because of the size of the stock breather hose, you will slide it all the way past the stops to this position. So let's go ahead and do that. And again, the clear hose is strictly to make it easier for you to see what I was trying to describe. Now you will put a zip tie here and here to make sure it bites on better. Like so. Now you'll take the 1/4 inch hose barb, and this being your PCV valve, you'll notice that this section of hose is already set to the correct length for the Ducar engine. If you have the Rado engine, you're going to be putting this on, so you will trim the appropriate length off of this hose in order to use the Rado engine. So, when you trim this hose, and now you put the adapter, and then you'll put the hose clamps on just like shown in the kit. Where this hose which would be your original black breather hose, slides onto the valve cover on the Ratto engine, you'll need to use one of the zip ties included in the kit. I don't When you go to slide this hose, which will be the original black breather hose from your generator, you will slide this onto the original port on the valve cover, and then you will use one of the zip ties included in the kit to tighten it down. As you remember, your original Ratto version of the generator did not have a clamp in this location. However, I would like a clamp here as well. On this end of the PCV valve that's supplied with my kit, there is already an additional 1/4 to 3/8 adapter. So then you will take the other half of your stock black breather hose, and again, I'm going to demonstrate it using a piece of clear hose. And once again, you will force the hose all the way past the barb to where it covers the flange, and then you will put a zip tie here and a zip tie here. So now the end that goes to the air box will look like this too. So it'll go on to the generator like this. This end will go to the valve cover. This will go to the fuel pump. It'll curve around and connect onto the air box, just like the original factory hose did. And then of course you will put clamps in each of the locations where it's required later. Let's go ahead and do that now. And we're going to get the pliers out to go put this end on, because it is not going to be easy. So I'm going to take and grasp it very firmly with a pair of pliers, and it goes on to the hose barb coming out of the valve cover where you removed the original breather hose from. And actually that one went pretty smooth with a pair of pliers. And then we're going to use a hose clamp to secure it. I'm sorry if I'm jumping with this camera. It's not as easy as it looks to hold a camera and explain correctly and do the install. Okay, so the next step is going to be to take the fuel pump included in the kit, remove it from the bag. You'll notice that there are two rubber caps, and the rubber caps are on the input and output of the fuel. So this is fuel out, this is fuel in, and this is the pulse port. So since this hose that connected to the one that used to go onto the back of the fuel selector valve is our fuel in, or excuse me, that's the fuel out, because it used to connect to the fuel selector valve, and when you're now running it to the fuel pump, the other end of it goes on up to the carburetor. So at any rate, the one that is spliced together goes to the fuel out. That would have confused some people if I had not corrected that mistake. Then this hose that we put the fuel T in is fuel in. So that goes to the fuel input port on the fuel pump. And I'm not putting clamps on them yet. We will put clamps on everything once it's fully assembled and into place. And then this is the pulse line, because of course it comes off of the crankcase breather. And it's going to go to the pulse line on the fuel pump, or excuse me, to the pulse port on the fuel pump. Then this hose is going to curve up and around. And then we're going to take the original breather hose that we removed when we pulled the valve cover off. We're going to slide that on to the adapter that's already installed in the end of the PCV line. And then we're going to put this end onto the spigot on the back of the air box where it originally went. And typically you can actually tell more by feeling than by looking, and yes, that is clearly all the way engaged. Okay, now we're going to take a zip tie. Initially you will need to drill a 3/16 hole in this flange, not into the heat shield area, but just into this flange, and I already drilled this hole earlier. So we're going to take a zip tie, include it in the kit, fit it through that hole, and just loosely clamp this PCV hose into place. And of course we're not going to cinch it down yet. Now, behind the spark plug wire we have a junction. And keep in mind, you've got a lot of crankcase pressure and vacuum here, all the way to here, into the fuel pump. And then when it gets to the PCV valve, there is very little pressure. This is just dump, and it goes into the air box. Now, I have already put the clamps onto the PCV valve because I've reshot this particular section about 5 times because I keep having the phone ringing and things like that. But you will put a hose clamp here on the T-fitting, here on the T-fitting, here on the T-fitting, one above and one below the PCV valve. Then in addition to that, you'll put another clamp right where the pulse line goes into the fuel pump. And I'm going to put the actual clamp tabs facing the back so that it gives more room between the cabinet door and the fuel pump. The clasp doesn't stick out this way, it'll go to the back. Then on this hose, I'm going to face it up at an angle because it doesn't really stick out the front any, as you can see. Then this hose, which is fuel coming out of the fuel pump and going into the carburetor, you'll notice it comes out of the fuel pump, goes through this little adapter and into the hose that we removed from the back of the fuel selector valve. So we're going to put a hose clamp on this hose also. And I'm going to face this hose to the back because there's a lot of room back there and it's just easy. then down here at this T-fitting, we're going to put hose clamps on all those connectors. So the one to the left and the one to the right, I'm going to make those pointing straight down. Then the one on the top hose, I'm going to face that away from the door. Then real quickly, here is a float bowl drain hose, and it goes through this fitting in the bottom of the generator housing. Try not to bump this out of here. If it does come out, it's easy to put back, but you just have to remember that that's where that goes. So now we've got these hoses in place. Tuck this right in. Okay. These two clamps up here, or these two positions up here, number one, you don't have to have clamps on this because it is after the PCV valve, so there's no pressure. It's just dumping the waste air into the air box. However, I'm going to go ahead and put zip ties in that location. There's really not enough room to put the white hose clamps. It's just a very tight quarters. The hose clamps are nice because you can open them and close them, reuse them. The zip ties, unfortunately, are a one-time deal, and once you've used them, the only way to get them off is to cut them off. So I don't like using those in any issue unless there's just flat not enough room to put a regular type hose clamp. And this is just such a case. So now we'll cut the ends. And then you'll notice that this hose clamp, or this hose, the original breather hose, has a chicane in it. And that was to allow room to go around the cable that goes to the propane shutoff valve, or the gasoline shutoff valve for propane use. Okay. This hose is in a nice position. I'm actually going to raise this one up just a little bit. Okay, I'm going to take a hose clamp and put it around the bottom three hoses, and that would be the breather hose, the fuel in, and the fuel out. And the breather hose, or PCV line hose, will be at the very top. Think of it as a triangle. The fuel into the fuel pump will be the bottom row closest to us. The fuel out of the fuel pump will be the bottom of the triangle, furthest away from us, and the top or peak of the triangle is going to be the pulse line or PCV line. Then we're going to take another hose clamp or zip tie and zip tie this fuel pump right over here to the hose to kind of hold it in position. Do not mount fuel pumps directly to an engine because the engine vibration will induce air bubbles in the fuel. And if you get air bubbles in the fuel, the engine is going to have an intermittent misfire, and you'll be irritated thinking, what on earth did I do wrong? And so that's why I put the zip tie holding the fuel pump to this hose, which is an excellent suspension mount. And you see the fuel pump is just held by the hoses here, so it doesn't get nearly as much vibration as the rest of the engine does. And then we want to run the fuel selector valve through the full range of motion to make sure that this arm, and that's the all the way down position, and that's propane, or the storage position, which is here, and that should be all the way up, and it stays up, and then you keep rotating it for gasoline, and it stays up. So I've returned it back to the off position, and we're just going to want to look through this and make sure that none of these hoses are kinked. This hose here is a little too long. I'm going to go ahead and trim this hose, and you'll see why shortly. I'm going to shorten it about 1 inch. And that is going to go to the fuel inlet port ultimately. We're going to put the fuel filter on it. And you'll notice my fuel filter has arrows, and those point in the direction of fuel flow. So obviously, the fuel is going to flow from the intake port to the fuel pump. And incidentally, my sticker with the directional arrows, I rotate the sticker to where it's out of the way. That way I can see the fuel filter and see if there's fuel and debris in it, and it makes servicing a lot easier. We'll get a couple more hose clamps here. The first hose clamp we're going to put on the output side of the fuel filter. And then we're going to take the last section of hose from the hose included in the kit, and we're going to pass it through in the back here and make sure it came out the other side of the generator, and it did. Then we're going to take this end of it and we're going to attach it to the input side of the fuel filter, and then we'll put a hose clamp on that. We'll just leave that hanging down there right now. Okay, so I want to scan everything, make sure that there's no places where hose clamps have been omitted, and no places where hoses are kinked or anything like that. Okay, all that looks good. Okay, so if you look at the bottom hoses, you can kind of understand what I was saying with it being like a triangular shape. This is the fuel coming into the generator or into the fuel pump. This is the pulse line, and this is the fuel coming out of the fuel pump going to the carburetor. And everything seems to be nice and smooth bends, and all the clamps are in place. So now it's time to go ahead and put the cabinet back on. Makes it a little bit easier if you remember to lift up on this rubber flap before you snap the cabinet into place. And like I said, when we're taking it apart, there are 7 bolts that look like this. They're an Allen head bolt. 7 of them go into the side, 2 into the front of each cover, and 2 into the back of each cover. around this side. Hang on a second. You'll notice that I forgot to rotate this Corbin clamp back down into the stock position. Not that it's critical, but that way if somebody's grading us on it, go ahead and remove the Corbin, the forceps that I had on that recoil start. We're going to go ahead and put this cover into place. Okay, there it goes. Felt just a little bit funny at first. Okay, now for the fuel inlet. Normally, if you've seen any of my other kits, I like to mount it in a protected area on the case. The problem with this generator is there are no good places on the cabinet to mount it. All through here, the fuel tank is right behind it. In the front, the electronics are right behind it. If you were to mount it straight into the side, it would stick out and you'd snag it on something or break it off, running it in and out of your truck bed. If you put it on this surface right here, it would stick out at an angle right down here, and that would be adequate, I guess. The only problem that I have is if you hit a bump or something like that in the sidewalk, it could easily break it off or mutilate the cabinet. So what I do is, since there's a door right down here for the oil change, I route it out through this door, and I'll make this hose about 5 inches longer than it needs to be coming out through here. And you will feed the hose out through this door and snap your extended run tank onto it from here when you're using the extended tank. And if you're using the stock tank or transporting it, you'll push this back in through the oil door, snap this shut, and that way it's nicely concealed. So the first step is going to be to take this and put the hose barb on it. So in order to do that, we take the Teflon tape, and remember to wrap the Teflon tape. The next thing is, do not wrap the Teflon tape over the end like this, because if you wrap it over the end like this, it will slice off that piece when you thread the hose barb on, and then you've got a piece of debris floating around the fuel system. So we'll go ahead and thread this on, and then we'll tear away this piece that I was holding in place with my thumb to get it all assembled. Then we've got to rotate it to where the hexes line up to get the wrench off. But I would still prefer to do it this way because the box end on the wrench works much better on brass fittings than the open end. And now we can tear this off. What we're going to do is when this hose comes out through here, we want to orient it so that the pins are facing forward. And that simply makes it easier to get it in and out through this hole because it's not an easy fit by any stretch of the imagination. If it were the other way around, facing like this, then you'd have the thin pins facing the back and the large portion facing forward. And if you look, the eyelet on the cabinet that holds this little rubber retainer sticks down there and makes it harder to get through. So if we fit it through this way, we can lay the brass connector inside the cabinet when it's not in use. And when we do want to be running it off the remote tank, we go ahead and feed it out through here. Now, for the hose clamp on here, this is one of those cases where if you really wanted to, you could put one of the white nylon hose clamps on there. And it would barely fit through, but it would be a pain in the neck. So again, even though they are not reusable, I'd rather put a couple of these zip ties to use there because they are a much lower profile and makes it a lot easier to get the brass fitting in and out through that little access door. If you wanted to, you could clip the hose just a little bit shorter and it would be even easier, but not a big deal. And that just lays in there like that. If you wish to, you could mount it in this portion of the cabinet on either side. I just don't like it sticking down that far because I'm afraid it might get broken off in a rough environment. Okay, so now it's time to go ahead and put the cover panels back on. If you do tuck the hose inside here, you'll have to pull this panel off in order to reconnect the hose, but it is a nice clean look then. And now we'll take the instruction sticker that's included in the kit, and you can put it either on this side or over here on this side of the generator. I prefer this side only because the two thumb screws are farther apart. And let me go ahead and say now that step 7 on this decal is not a misprint. Okay, so if you're watching this video on my website, you already know how everything works. If you're watching this video on YouTube and you want to know more about it, you look in the description section of the YouTube video and you'll see that there is a link to my website. Go ahead and click that link, go to my website, and you'll see just about anything you could possibly want to know about this. If you have additional questions, don't hesitate to call me. That's what I'm here for. And I thank you for your time.